Doris Beauchesne Cody is a first and third generation Franco-American born in Lowell, Mass. In 1930 and still living there with her husband Louis Cody. 3 of her 5 children and numerous grandchildren and great-grandchildren live in Lowell and surrounding towns. Her oldest child is Denise Beaudry of nearby Tingsboro. Doris's maternal grandmother, Elvina Grenier, a widow, moved from St. Leonard in the province of Quebec to Lowell in 1899 with her 4 sons and 3 daughters, including Doris's mother, Albertine, so the family could support itself with work in the city's mills and shoe shops. Doris's paternal great-grandparents, Moise and Parmelia Bellevaux Beauchesne, moved from Quebec to New Hampshire in the late 1800s, and their son Aurel was born in Somersworth, New Hampshire. Aurel's son Armand, Doris's father, was born in Dover, New Hampshire, and met Doris's mother Albertine in Lowell, where they married in 1915. Doris and her husband Louis married in Lowell on May 31st, 1954. In addition to 5 children, they've currently welcomed 6 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren into their world. Hi, so glad to see you all today. My name is Suzanne Beebe. My maiden name is Suzanne Muller. My background is French-Canadian on both sides. I was born in Lowell, raised in Lowell, went to school in Lowell, went away for a while, came back, got married to this gentleman here, and we live in North Chelmsford, but I have gotten very involved with French committees, etc., in Lowell the past 5, 6, 7 years. And I got to know the lady in the middle of the table there. Her name is Doris Cody, anglicized. Doris Côté, not anglicized, and I got to know Doris when we were both singing in the same group. She is 93 and a half years old, and she can still sing. You should hear this woman sing. Sitting to her left is her daughter, one of her 5 children, Denise Beaudry, and I'll let Denise tell you her age if she wants to. Otherwise, I know she's younger than me. So. And then on this side is one of Doris's grandchildren, Samantha Moran.
My youngest.
Yes, yep. And Samantha will be, this is my first time meeting Samantha, so I'm eager to hear what she has to say about herself. But we thought it would be very interesting for a group of you to get the experience of being Franco-American in Lowell, part of the Great Migration down, mostly from Quebec in Lowell, and to hear it from somebody who grew up in the culture when it was numerous. A good 1/3 of Lowell's population at one time was French-Canadian in background. So it was large, it was vibrant, it was centered in a number of neighborhoods, and Doris can tell you what it was like growing up in French neighborhoods the way they used to be. And then Denise can take it from there. So Doris will speak first, Denise will speak second, And Samantha, you might find interesting to get her perspective as the younger generation. So there we go. Let's take it.
You guys can take the stands. I'll hold this one.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for being here.
Close.
I hope that some of you will have questions that will help me along. But growing up in the French-Canadian family, my mother was French. Mom came from Canada very early in life and settled in Lowell. And they married, my parents married in 1915. And then they went on to raise a family of 15 children, 11 boys and 4 girls. And I am now the last living one. Everybody has gone. But growing up, there were so many French people all around, and all large families. And most of them lived in huge tenement blocks. We called them tenement blocks. That is, they were all where the other part of UMass Lowell is now situated. On both sides of the canal were these big tenement buildings, and the people, the kids were playing outside. They never had all these structured playgrounds like you have today. We played in the street. We were lucky because across the street from us was a field, and so we were able to play there. We played marbles. We played kick the can, hide and seek, tag. We'd bounce a ball on the people on the tenement block where we didn't live, but and we'd bounce the ball, the girls would bounce and jump over it, roller skate up and down the street, the marbles, that was a big thing. There was a dirt area, and we'd make circles, put the marbles in, and then you had the big marble that you had to shoot to get the smaller marbles out of that ring, and I was no good at it. But I had a friend who could beat me all the time, and she won all my marbles. And but like I said, that we were 15. My aunt lived down the street. They had 16. But this was the norm. They had big families, and like in one tenement block, my aunt had 16 children, 3rd floor. The 2nd floor, they had 14 children. The people downstairs, they only had 8. But this was the 3 tenements in the back. And then when you went in the front, there were 3 other tenements there. And you could have as many children there. But everybody was living like that. So there was no, we didn't stand out. We were like everybody. And we had our own school. I went to St. Joseph's School. Now we had a school for girls and a school for boys. Heaven forbid we don't mix. So now the girls' school was from 1st grade to the 8th grade with the nuns. And then the boys' school was on a different street. And they also had from 1st to 8th grade. At the time, they didn't have a high school, because I know that my older brothers, if they had been a high school there at St. Joseph's, that's where they would have gone. My father would never have let them go to a public high school. But there wasn't a Catholic high school there at the time. So my older brother went to Lowell High, but then they did put in a high school, and that's where the boys went to the boys' high school and the girls went to the girls' high school. And every month the good nuns would bring us to church, And Good Friday, everybody went to confession. And on Good Friday, we were brought to church, all the groups, 2 by 2. And of course, there was no talking. You couldn't talk. Couldn't keep me from talking. And but this was the church was full. At the church that I belonged to, at one time had a 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:45, 7 o'clock, 8:15 the children's mass, 9:30 a high mass, and then at 11 o'clock 2 masses in the main church and in the lower church. And at every mass the church was full. And it was the French culture. They were all Catholics, and that's where they went. And but then when they started that new project, they started taking all parts of Little Canada, all parts of Moody Street. Now, where Morissette Boulevard is now, there were tenements all the way down. There was no Morissette Boulevard. This was all tenements, and on both sides of the canal. And all the French Canadians, the new people were all there. And there were little grocery stores, no big markets. So there was a little grocery store who would deliver. And so my mother would, when we got the telephone, before that they would deliver, and she would tell them what she needed for the next day, and they'd come and deliver the next day. And but when we got the phone, that was great. Then she could call up if she needed something. And it was just a little mom and pop store, you know, but they had everything you needed. You'd buy a big piece of ham, they'd throw in the carrots or the cabbage for free. And we shopped there that was my mother's shopping. She never went anywhere else. And but then we had milkmen coming to the house, or we had a baker coming to the house. We had peddlers. They'd come in with fresh vegetables, and he'd ride the streets and he'd yell, "Des beaux bananes, des pommes, des oranges." They would have all kinds of stuff on his truck. And he would go by daily, so that's where we got our fresh vegetables, from the truck. And we had a rag man, and he'd come by. He was still a wagon and a horse, and his name was Cayif. Where he got that name, I don't know, but he was the rag man. And he'd come in with his burlap bag, and if you had rags, you'd put them in the bag, and he had this little scale, and he'd weigh them and give you maybe 5 or 10 cents for the pack. But this is what was going on when I was young, a couple of years ago. And so it was really, it was nice, because everybody, after supper, everybody sat on their doorsteps, talked to everybody that went by. Everybody knew everybody. Today you don't get to know your neighbors because everybody has to work. But it was totally different. And adjusting to some of these things have not been easy. And we would like to keep our culture, but unfortunately it's not happening. And we have to live with that. But it was, like I said, it was nice because like I said, everybody got along. There was no bickering. And there were just as many different nationalities around our house. We had Irish people, we had Greek people, we had, well, mostly, there were no colored people around our house at all. And, but the French, the Irish, we'd greet each other, you know, and sit together and talk about our kids, and that's the way it was. It was a very slow pace, but naturally the women all stayed home. They had babies. They couldn't work. Oh my Lord. They could work at home constantly because the washing machines were not run automatic. There was a stick where you would have to move the agitator, but later on we got one that worked by itself. That was a treat. And the refrigerators were not, they were ice box. So we had that guy going around selling ice. And we'd run after the truck to pick up all the little pieces of ice that the little chips. And so you put the card in the window, and depending on which side you put it, he knew just what size piece of ice you needed. And he'd put it on your shoulder, bring it in, put it in your refrigerator. And heaven forbid, somebody was in charge of emptying the pan that was under the refrigerator, because that ice didn't last forever. It melted. And I knew my brothers had that job. Unfortunately, they didn't always think about it. It happened more than once that we had water all over the place. And that didn't make my mother too happy. But like I said, there were sodalities then. Women joined the women's St. Anne's sodality. The men had the holy name. The boys had guardian angels. And there was the whole, everyone was involved around their church. And it was, this is what kept the Franco-Americans together at the time. They'd have card parties, they'd have bean suppers, and the places were packed. You know, they'd have 2-3 sittings because there were so many people. But when they started the renewal and everybody had to move away, they had to find another place to live, and they couldn't all live in that neighborhood. So that's when the Francos really started losing all their members, you know. But it's I guess it was meant to be. But that's what it was, and that's how we grew up. So my kids went to Catholic schools and Catholic high schools. But they spoke French when they were little in the house. We were able to keep the French language. But then when they started playing outside, their friends didn't speak French. So they kind of lost it. And then another thing that was, what TV did a number on our language because the kids would watch TV, and naturally it's all in English. So that's another way that they lost their language. Now my children understand, and but they don't speak unless they're really stuck. If they're stuck, they could make themselves heard. But no, it's my husband and I still speak French, but like all the others, we tend to move to English also. But I'll let my daughter let her tell you how she feels about it.
Well, my mother already told you that I went to Catholic schools all my life, and I was very fortunate to have great teachers that also spoke French, and so the French education continued in school, not just at home. I mean, it wasn't the same French as I was hearing at home because, like my mother said, the language, in as much as it came from Canada, it changed quite a bit once it got to Lowell. You know, you had French words with English words and French words pronounced in English, and so it wasn't quite the same. But anyway, there are some traditions that were kind of passed on, not by anyone saying this is your tradition. I mean, I remember around Christmas time, my mother's brothers and sisters, every week after Christmas, they'd go to someone's house and visit. And they'd see all the presents that people got, you know. But that was one of the ways that they maintained their relationship with one another. By then, there were probably still 11 of them when they were all married, you know. So they went to everybody's house, and they'd do several houses per night. And they'd have food, and they'd have drinks, and so they had that's how they maintained staying in each other's lives. And so as I got older, the aunts and uncles got less, and so eventually that tradition stopped. I used to enjoy it because my bedroom was right next to the kitchen, and I could peek through the door and hear everything they were saying, you know, things not necessarily intended for children's ears, but nevertheless, it was fun to hear them talking in French. And I was able to understand, even though, as my mother mentioned, I don't speak so much French anymore, but I can read it. And if I go to a French mass and the priest does the mass and the sermon in French, I can kind of understand. I get the gist. Let me put it that way. I don't understand everything he says. Like when Professor Baillargeon speaks, I don't understand a lot of what she says because it's not the French I grew up with. You know, I have a cousin who taught French. So when she speaks French, it's not so much the French I understand either. You don't understand her either, yeah. So
It's Parisian French.
it's Parisian French, and she's not, she doesn't hesitate to correct us when we misspeak, you know, but it's all in fun. And unfortunately, you know, another tradition that, I don't know if it's so much French, but I remember, you know, my aunts and uncles all talking about beans and hot dogs on Saturday nights. And we did that with brown bread, and it just seems like, well, we do it on occasion, not as much as we used to, but growing up, that used to be fun. You know, it was a good meal. We enjoyed it very much. But it was more fun because we knew other people were doing the same thing, you know, and so, like I said, I don't speak so much French anymore. My kids don't speak French.
At all.
You know, at all. I mean, when we get together and play cards, we do throw in a few French words here and there, but it's a lost art. So if you have the chance to learn French, I would encourage you to do so. I mean, French, if you know, I know how to, I don't even know how to say it, when I do crossword puzzles and stuff like that. Knowing French helps me figure out a word maybe in another language. Or if I come across something in another language, I can relate it to French and kind of figure out what they're saying, you know? So it's, even though I don't speak it much, the recollection is there, like the origin of the word. It's really been helpful in so many ways. So, I mean, and I'm sure that's the case with anybody who knows two languages. It's just such a gift that we take for granted, you know? But anyway, like my mother said, I hope you have questions, because this is not our strong suit. But we're very happy to be here. Thank you. Over to you, Sam.
That's me. Okay, so I'm Sam Moran, not a French last name, but do come from these lovely ladies. So I am turning 30 this month, and it's funny because when my aunt, which I never call her that, she's ma tante, when she asked me to join her, I immediately felt imposter syndrome because I don't inherently feel any drastic measure of French in my daily life, I would say. But she asked me a couple weeks ago, and since then I've been thinking about how my French heritage has influenced my life and where I can still see it today. And I was able to identify it in a few subtle ways, but experience that I have in kind of learning my French heritage outside of my home is I went to the same school. I went to St. Jean d'Arc, that is in Pawtucketville in Lowell, same school that all of my aunts went to, aunts and uncles and mother went to. So I'm one of two. My sister and I both went to that school. And then we both ended up going to Lowell High, which was a little bit of a culture shock because even when I was growing up, Pawtucketville was still pretty French-based, and I didn't realize how much of a silo that I was growing up in until I went to the melting pot of Lowell High, which was great. I mean, it's fantastic. Everybody needs exposure, right? But as I went there, I would say things in terms, and people would kind of look at me funny. And I quickly found out that that silo that I was growing up in was a little tighter than I thought it was, because there were, as you know, my meme was talking about, they would kind of make their own language, and it was almost kind of like this microculture of Lowellian French that made their own words, whether it was a mishmash of two French words, or which were, maybe there was some Parisian French in there, or Quebecois French, whatever it was, and some English as well thrown in there. We spoke slang, and so it was really interesting when I would say certain things and quite literally not have another word to express what I was trying to say, because I thought that was either I thought it was the English word or whatever it was, and I all of a sudden could find that I couldn't communicate in certain areas, especially around areas of like holidays, which was really interesting. I don't feel it as much today as I'm a little bit more removed, but it's definitely inherent in my upbringing, and it's interesting to me as well, because I think that as I grow up, like just sitting here, I just learned some stuff that I didn't know about my own family and their upbringing. And I have a fondness for the culture. I am very aware that the culture is dwindling a bit, and it's because of the different nature of the city of Lowell. There are Pawtucketville in and of itself is kind of like a hub for students at this point, which is great in certain senses, but it's not the same neighborhood I grew up in. So if I want to learn of these stories and how things were at one point and kind of revive that culture, it's an active thing that you need to do. You're not going to be able to passively step out of your door, sit on your doorstep, talk to your neighbors quite anymore. You can learn about many other wonderful cultures, but it might not be necessarily yours. And so that's just kind of where I'm at with my Franco-American experience.
Well, Sam had a slap in the face the other day when she was talking with some kids at her work.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
With the
Like that was just it's one of, I just said something was a faux pas, which I think is not explicit. I guess it's a French expression, but I think that many other people know what that is, but I apparently not. So, but things like that. But yeah, that's kind of how I melted into things. When I was 4, I went to Jeanne d'Arc and I was learning English, and then also trying to learn Parisian French, and then coming home and also playing cards and hearing the slang of, rien, saying there's nothing in front of you, which isn't a real word. And so it didn't transfer. But yeah, it's, I guess as, 3 generations down, it's still there. I can feel it, but you also have to be interested enough to go find it if you want to continue it, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's why we're here.
We're big card players.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that was the pastime, played My father always had someone at the house. They were either playing pinochle or cribbage, and then we had a carom board, but we called it pishnut because that's what we did. We hit the pishnut, but it's the carom board. My father had made one, and my mother had crocheted the pockets. If you don't know what it is, it's a big board with little discs like this that you put behind the line and you try to get them in the pockets.
With
And
your finger.
that was
You're
our,
hitting-
that's what we did at night. We played the carom board, we played cards.
But you
we
sang,
listened
too.
to the radio, sitting there, and you could picture what was happening because, of course, we never had TV, and we listened to all kinds of radio shows, The Lone Ranger, and whatever happened to be on, and. But most of the people, they were card players, and not for money, just for the sake of being together and playing. And, I mean, we're big spenders. We play for nickels. When we play, we have 3 different games that we play for nickels, and now we've graduated to scat for 25 cents. Breaks my heart. But this is how we entertained ourselves, with these very few things that we had. And we passed the time away.
Yep.
So if somebody wants to ask any questions,
So I know you guys were talking about that you're Catholic and you had, and around the holidays, were there any holidays that were like more French specific that you guys kind of did, or any?
Christmas. I mean, Christmas, naturally, we had the midnight mass. Most of my brothers, myself, we all sang, so we all belonged to choirs. So midnight mass, we'd sing at midnight mass, and we'd go back home and we had to go to bed because there was no opening gifts. Because my father did not go to midnight mass. He would go to an early mass on Christmas Day. And if you think it's easy that you have to wait for Dad to come back from church, and Dad has to have breakfast because he couldn't have breakfast before going to church at the time. Couldn't receive if you had breakfast. So we had to wait and for Dad, and we'd sit in the parlor and go shake all the gifts. There were not that many because we couldn't afford them. But we'd look and you'd say, "What do you think's in there?" Oh, that's mine. And we'd just sit there, and we had a stocking which would contain an orange, a tangerine, an apple, maybe a couple of walnuts, and if we were lucky, there might have been a couple of pennies at the bottom. But that was it. The stocking we were able to, were able to take. But the gifts were not opened until Dad had finished his breakfast. And boy, were we hoping he wasn't hungry too much because, and breakfast was usually pork pie. That was our Christmas dinner, pork pie. But that was the longest wait that, but Dad was always the one, he had a little more time probably, and he always made his packages look so nice. They were always wrapped up beautifully with a little bow on it. My mother had and there it was. She didn't have time to wrap. But we were always anxious to see how Dad would wrap up his gifts. He had a gift for that. He was good at that. He was slow at eating, but we did get to open our gifts, whatever. We had underwears, pajamas, new socks.
All the things a kid really wants.
Yeah, all the kids that really want. Yeah, toys were not a big thing, no. We couldn't afford all these big toys. But, hey, we were happy. We didn't miss what we didn't know we didn't have.
Yep.
Because everybody was the same. Nobody had any more than the others. And Sunday afternoon, we had a movie. That was a big day. We had a movie at the parish hall, and it cost 10 cents. And we had 2 movies. And boy, was my mother glad. She'd save all week to give us that 10 cents so she could get rid of us for a few hours. And we'd sit through the movies. We never had any money to spend for candy, heaven forbid, no. But we'd go to the movies, and it was run by the parish. So naturally, there was no doubt that it was something that children were, it was okay for them to watch, you know. And this was our Sunday afternoon. We'd go to the movies. So this is how it was.
Yep.
Do you have any French-specific holiday-related things that you remember? Because to me,
Use the microphone.
Saint Jean Baptiste, did you celebrate Saint Jean
Not
Baptiste?
really.
Oh, use
No.
the microphone.
No, no, we celebrated all the holidays, you know, like for Thanksgiving, we'd celebrate that, we'd have a big turkey, and, but St. Anne's, the Feast of St. Anne's in July, that, because at the time, the young kids were not going to church, babies and things like that. They were not bringing them to church. But on July 26th, the Feast of St. Anne, the priest would have a special ceremony where the mothers would bring the babies to church for a special blessing. And we thought it was awful. Babies were crying in church. You're not supposed to cry or to talk in church, but the babies were crying, naturally. But every year, the mothers would get their babies all dressed up, and they were proud to bring them to church for a special blessing. And, no, there were no special holidays, you know. We followed the tradition, Easter and all those, but,
And all of this is happening in French. Like, you're living entirely in French.
yes.
Were the movies in
my
French?
No, the movies were in English.
Okay.
Yeah, the movies were in English. But, no, in the house, we spoke French, definitely. Yeah, my father insisted on it.
The church was in French too, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely. The church never went to English until the mid-60s, early 70s,
I remember that.
with the French, yeah.
I remember going to church and it was just in French.
Mm.
That was not, it wasn't easy. I was happy when they went to English myself.
Yeah,
Yep.
but that was life.
Any
Yeah.
other questions?
First, thanks to all three of you for sharing your stories today, and I know, just thank you for sharing all that insight and talking about your memories. I wanted to ask a question just about kind of when things started changing and what you remember of that. And so, in some ways, that was a happy thing for some of you. Things felt maybe more accessible for the younger generations or the kids. But was there also, was there resistance to some of that change in the community? And I don't mean to ask you to, bring up unpleasant memories, but what did that change feel like, and how were people reacting to those things
There
in the
were
60s
a lot
and
of
70s?
hard feelings when all these French people had to move, you know. We knew that things would never be the same because they relocated and wherever they could find lodging, and it really broke up all the French community spirit because it was like, oh, well, what are we going to do now, you know? But it was gradual, but you could see it happening. People just moved further and further away, and then everything started dwindling down. The spirit wasn't there anymore. No, it was gradual, but it was sad to see it happening. It really was. Yeah.
And in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of French Catholic churches close. And that lends itself to what my mother said. It's sad, you know, because where these Franco-Americans had congregated, I mean, they at least would see them, each other on Sundays at church, because that was the only day of the week they had masses. They didn't have masses on Saturday nights, you know. And so once they started closing the churches, well, then you had it happening all over again, where now they had to disperse even more and find another church to go to. And, you know, you can mess with people as much as you want, but you can't mess with their religion, you know, and this is what happened. And some of them chose not to find another church to go to.
Yeah,
And
unfortunately, a lot of them did.
yeah, but then, once again, they reverted back to their churches, and we had our church closed 15 years ago, maybe?
2004.
2004. Okay, so even longer ago. But that was devastating, and we had to go to another church, which we did, but it puts that church in a very awkward position. How welcoming should they be? Because we were kind of pissed off, to say the least. You know, we were mad, and they really couldn't do anything right to welcome us because our feelings were so hurt. I mean, over time, you kind of get over that, but having found other churches, even when you start going to their social events, you congregate with the other French people who are now there at this. It was more of an English church. And so, but in our minds, they were Protestants because they weren't French, you know? And, but so we just stuck with our own when we started socializing at this church. And even to this day, you just gravitate towards the French-speaking people when you go anywhere, you know? So you try to do the best you can to be with people from the old neighborhood, so to speak, whether it's a church or a neighborhood. And I don't think that's unique to Franco-Americans. I think that's anybody that who has their lives disrupted.
Hello. I would also love to say a big thank you to you ladies. This has been incredibly interesting to hear. And I just wanted to say that the memory you had about the Franks and Beans was very endearing to me because I only have a little bit of French-Canadian heritage. My family is mostly Irish Catholic, but Franks and Beans was a huge treat for me when I went to my grandparents' house when I was little as well. So that was very sweet to hear that that's kind of a commonality. And on that note, I was wondering what are some of your favorite French food memories from your youth or from your lifetime? I loved hearing that anecdote about the pork pies as well, so I would love to hear about some food as well.
I didn't hear all that.
Do you have any favorite French foods that you grew up with, or?
The pork pie, mostly, and pea soup,
Oh, yeah.
and our beans and hot dogs.
You can see how simple they all
And
are.
salmon pie. Some people never heard of salmon pies, but we like salmon pies. And of course, I had a brother that he loved mince ham. He worked 5 days a week. His sandwiches were bologna. And It was cheap then.
Yeah.
Now it isn't.
I have one. Anybody here know gâteau?
Pork scrap.
Yes. So, this was one of those things when I went to school and I wanted gâteau. People would look at me like I was insane. And my family has a funny sense of humor because they would not tell me what the English words were. So it took until high school for me to figure out that it's pork scraps. And but in that church community that I remember from my earlier childhood, like middle school age, I mean, we'd go to our 10 o'clock mass, and then the entire congregation would go to the hall afterward and have breakfast together, where all of the nuns from my school would be, and we would catch up, and they would be certain to talk to you in French if they were your French teacher. But my most fond memory, and something that I will still eat even as a pescatarian today, is pork scrap. And it's literally I'll make a piece of toast, put some, it's like a spread, and then some mustard on it, and that's like, ooh.
Yeah.
I just want to add a quick thing there. One of the funny things for me about gâteau is when I moved here, and I'm from Quebec, and I grew up in the suburb of Montreal, and I moved to the United States later in life, and we call them crotons.
Croton.
The croton.
Yeah, so it's a deformation of French, kind of that's regional, and it took me a while to be like, what are you talking
What are they
about?
eating?
What are they calling gâteau? I was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Like I
That's
said,
funny.
it's a mishmash.
we do murder the language.
We do too. So.
By the way, if anybody is interested in tasting gâteau, if you go to Cody's Market on Salem Street, you can get the pork pies, you can get the gâteau, you can get the salmon pies, etc. You know, Cody's is really the last food store in Lowell.
That's where I was brought up, right
Right.
across the street from
Yes,
Cody's
okay.
Market.
So if you know where Cody's is, you know where Doris grew up, close by.
Bowers Street.
But you can, they sell little containers of the gâteau.
Oh, I
So
make my own.
You can buy one and see what it tastes like.
I make my own, it's cheaper.
Hi, my name's Kaylee. I'm from Lowell, and my father's side is Canadian. So we grew up, they grew up in Little Canada, but we always grew up talking about Jack Kerouac, he just looms huge over everything, from him going, showing up at Boy Scout meetings and all of that. I was wondering how you feel about the fact that he's kind of the only one that has left a record of this Lowell Canadian culture, and even the dialect of the French, in Dr. Sachs and stuff like that. That's might be one of the last things where people can actually see that. I was wondering how you felt about that.
Yeah, I really haven't followed Kerouac that much, I mean, I was out of circulation for 4 years because I was in the convent. And then when I came back, married, raised a family, so I never really followed. I have a granddaughter who could probably, her daughter is really into Jacques Kerouac, but I am not, so I really couldn't, I really couldn't say anything on that.
No.
Okay. This is super interesting. And one of the things I find very interesting is how, and this is super personal because I am from Quebec and I have that French-Canadian heritage, how many things still kind of are similar culturally between French-Canadian culture and how it kind of migrated down south here and got integrated into and became the Franco-American kind of identity. And I was wondering how much back and forth or contact was there between Quebec and the Franco-Americans in Lowell, and do you still feel a kind of connection to Canada, or is it something like that now you kind of have created a different kind of identity that's
Yeah.
new?
Yeah, no, it's more, because, like I said, once my grandparents came to Lowell, to my knowledge, there were no others left in Canada. So there was no big relationship with Lowell and Quebec, not really, but, no, I don't think so, but,
So it's like once the individuals
Yeah.
that connected you there are no longer gone or no longer here, it kind of like, the
Yeah.
separation is kind of
Yeah.
gone.
kind of, yeah.
At least with regards to her family,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
different for some other families
Oh,
that still have
absolutely.
relatives up there.
Hmm.
So my sister's husband has family in Quebec and some in Montreal, I think, as well. And it's funny because they entirely only speak French, and he does not. And his parents also didn't quite. I mean, they're very similar to my aunt, so can kind of piece it together, can get themselves to tell them to go left or right, but like can't. But they would do yearly family trips, and when my sister had gone, it was very interesting because she had mentioned that the ties of just like traditions being very dinner at 5 o'clock on the dot because that's when it's expected, and also they would have hot dogs and beans and things like that. I think that she only went a couple times, but there were a few things that did tie back, even though she, as part of my generation and not really speaking the language, couldn't really communicate with them. There were things that they could bond on, which was nice.
Yeah.
Just another family's.
No, that's cool. Anything else?
This is a bit of a segue away from the previous topic, but something I haven't really come across much in looking through the archival materials that we have at the Center for Lowell History is if there was any particular clothing or fashion that you remember that was kind of part of the French Canadian culture when you were growing up. Was there any particular way that you felt you dressed that was distinct? Or maybe what do you remember wearing to school? Those are just insights I haven't really come across much, even in the preserved accounts of growing up that we have published in books and stuff. So I was wondering if you had any insight on that.
Is there any traditional clothing that was handed down from one French clothing from
I
one
know that
generation?
in school, there was the uniform, and it was a black dress with a white collar and white cuffs. But these dresses were worn year-round with long stockings. We're not allowed to wear knee-highs or ankle socks. And they were big woolen dresses, very hot, very hot. But that's what everybody wore. And then when you got to the high school, well, it was a little easier. It was still uniform. It was a jumper with a light-colored blouse. And but it was standard, and I don't remember what the boys had to wear. I know that I remember when they came home from school, they had to get out of their school clothes and get into their play clothes. But I don't remember if they had a standard uniform. I was trying to think about that. And I can't remember.
Now, when your brothers were growing up and they were younger, let's say younger than 10, they all kind of wore short pants, right?
Knickers.
Knickers. Was that just a French thing? Or was
No,
that
that
just?
was the style at
Okay.
the time.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
They were down to the knees, but they wore that, but they were small. But the younger ones didn't go into that. It was more the older ones.
Was there anything specific to the French as far as clothes goes?
No, no,
Okay.
whatever they could afford.
Mhm.
Yep, that was it. A lot of hand-me-downs. if you had clothes that were still good, you pass it down to the next person who needed it. And it was, everybody did it.
Yeah, with 15 kids, it's understandable. My God.
Everybody did it. My mother spent, my mother was born much too soon. She'd be in heaven today if she saw pants like this. My mother spent half her life repairing jeans. The boys she hated football because the kids would come in with ripped jeans. And I saw her take the seam apart to put a patch on the knees. And I said, oh my God, she would be so happy today.
That's funny.
She always had this huge basket of mending. She never got to the bottom because she kept having to mend the jeans, mend the socks. There was no throwaway. You recycled it.
Doris, do you want to tell the people here about how a family of 15 children took baths on Saturday night?
We did. We were lucky. We were not in a tenement. We had a cottage. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs. My mom and dad's bedroom was downstairs because that's where she had all her babies. My aunt, who had 16 kids, would come deliver my mother's babies, and she would go deliver her babies. So they got along great. But we did not have a quote-unquote bathroom. We had a toilet. They had taken part of a room to put a toilet, so we had that. But we did not have a bathtub. We had a galvanized tub, and that was put in my mother's room on Saturday because there was a furnace in my mother's room. Because of the babies, they needed the heat. We had the big galvanized tub, and the cleanest ones would get to go first and wash up in the tub. And that alone. Yes. And what happened was that as the boys got older, there was where the new bridge is on Textile Bridge. Now there was a fraternal club there called the CMAC Club. This was just for men. And they had bowling alleys downstairs, and they had showers down there. So naturally, as my brothers would be pin boys at the bowling alleys. And if you were good, you could do 2 lanes. And then what they would do, as soon as they got their job, they could start doing it around 13 or 14 years old. They would work at pin boys, and then they weren't supposed to, but they would sneak in and take a shower over there. So it would make it a lot easier for them. And the older boys, the older brothers were members, so they could take their shower there. But as kids, we washed in a galvanized tub. And she'd heat up as much water as she could and keep adding a little bit of hot water, but you weren't getting clean water every time you were getting in. Whoever was the cleanest went first.
And that didn't stop with my mother's generation, because when I was growing up with my 2 sisters, we were
We had a
3
bathtub.
sisters in 4 years. We would all bathe together. So it wasn't just then. I mean, thank you, God, it wasn't a galvanized tub.
It was a
And the
bathtub.
water was warm, and it was pretty clean, so. But some of those traditions were handed down even through my generation.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
We weren't alone. Some of them didn't even have a toilet, and it was in the hallway for all the tenements. It was one on each floor. Some of them didn't have it in the house. So, we had it, well, we were rich, we had it. Yeah.
In the tenements, if all the families had the same bathing process, where did the water get dumped at the end? If there was,
In the sink,
oh, in the,
oh, yeah.
oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, we had to, take a pot and empty it, make a lot of trips.
Wow. Everybody developed muscles doing that.
And we all survived. Yeah.
All right, I have what I think might be one last question, unless does anybody else have? Okay. So I would like to know, and this is a big question, but it could be a really simple answer too. If there were one aspect of the Franco-Lowell culture that you would want future generations to remember, what would that be? And it can be different for each three of you, because you're coming at it from a different place.
I think it would be our weekly mass. It was like a big family. We had the children's mass. Everybody was there, and it was, I don't know, it was just a get together, and giving our thanks all together, and just the atmosphere that was there at the time was so relaxing, and that's not there anymore. Yeah.
It was community.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you kind of,
Yeah.
I'd have to agree with that.
yeah.
Yeah.
What did it mean for you? Or what was it like for you?
I mean, I have the Franco-American has the Franco-American Week. And I look forward to that because I hear stories from the past. And some of them relate to my upbringing. But just hearing people speak French, like my mother speaks French, and hearing their stories, it's kind of like a lost art. And I get indulged for a week, and it's fun. It's fun. I enjoy it a lot. So, but I enjoy it.
So the art of storytelling in
And,
French.
these Franco-Americans, they can tell stories. They got a lot of stories to tell.
Yeah.
They do.
And I think that's a Franco kind of thing, or
Yeah.
maybe every culture kind of has it slightly differently, but
Right.
I know that back home we are like a really big culture of storytellers. And it gets lost because of technology and because of work and because of all the things that like we're all kind of like living.
Yeah.
But there's like this undercurrent of like people liking to get together and people liking to share meals together and people liking to slow things down, liking to tell stories. So I feel like it's something that still kind of is is something shared by this common origin,
Well,
let's
yeah.
say.
Mhm.
Yeah. What about you?
I think that for me, it's the intentionality of gatherings. I still to this day, like as if I'm dating someone and I go to their family holidays or something like that, they're very modernized, I've felt. Whereas, of course I'm biased. But I think that when we get together for family holidays, if you go into it with intention, like if you sit there and you play cards and we all laugh and we joke and that's something, but we can also, I think we put a lot of effort into just talking about how things were at one time and kind of, I think we internally built the community that I miss from when I was a little girl, from the parish that I used to have and the broader community that was in the blocks of Pawtucketville. That doesn't really exist anymore, but I think it's something that we just turned inward for. And so, I don't know, there's just something about, and it's small things, it's nuanced things. There's not some one particular thing that I'd be like, oh yeah, you need to put out your creche at night and make sure you don't put baby Jesus out until December 25th because he's not there. Like, there aren't specific things like that, but I do think that there's something to be said about how intentional we are when we gather.
Yeah, I love that. I love the fact that it's like a way of being in a way that's like the most important or meaningful aspect of the culture. That is, it is worth preserving and propagating, because I think we can all benefit from spending more time with our community and being intentional in the relationships that we develop with people.
Yeah, and not to like be resistant to modernization of holidays or anything like that, but there's something to be said about the way things once were when there wasn't distraction. Like, we cannot have our cell phone at the dinner table. It's not a thing. And I think that's something that could be lost and something that helps harbor relationships with your relatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, the culture is you go to Mimes for the holidays, go to Mimes for Thanksgiving, you go to Mimes, but now Mimes getting smarter. Everybody brings something now. It's Mimes getting too old to do it all by herself. So everybody has something to bring. You bring the potatoes, you bring the vegetables, you bring dessert, you bring snacks.
Yeah.
Mimi's the grand organizer.
Mimes love it.
That's awesome. All right.
It's a lot.
It is your big families too.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Does anybody, do you have any parting words for us?
I don't know. I hope I didn't bore you too.
Oh, no.
No, thank you for having us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure and a delight, and we are so happy that we're able to share this moment with you.
Thank you.
Okay.